Join renowned attorney and mediator David Hoffman for a 6-week live workshop starting this October. Explore how the IFS model can support lawyers, mediators, and conflict professionals to lead with more clarity, compassion, and self. With special guest appearances by Dick Schwartz, Mike Elkin, and Fatima Finney, this program offers practical tools for navigating client engagement, negotiation, and ethical decision making. Space is limited and live attendance is required. Learn more and register now at ifs-institute.com. Welcome to Season 6 of the One Inside an Internal Family Systems podcast. I'm Tammy Sollenberger, author of The One Inside 30 Days to Your Authentic Self. This podcast is for anyone curious about their inner world and who have a desire to connect to that authentic self. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I am super excited today to have David Hoffman on the podcast. He is a lawyer, and he was voted best lawyer in Boston. He is lawyer of the year. That's what it is. Lawyer of the year in Boston, which I think sounds like a pretty big deal because I'm guessing there's lots of lawyers in Boston. He is the founding member of Boston Law Collaborative. He teaches at Harvard. I mean, I think everyone wants to say, oh, well, I teach at Harvard. Just walk around saying that when you go to Starbucks. I teach at Harvard. He's written several articles about IFS and bringing IFS into mediation and lawyer things. And he's going to be, which we're going to talk about this at the end, he's going to be, I love this so much, David. You're going to be bringing IFS to mediators and lawyers this fall. So it's 2025. So people that are maybe listening to this not in 2025, just know that that's what's happening. I'm super excited about that. And then in this program, you're gonna have Dick. Dick is a buddy of yours, and Dick's gonna come help with the program, and Mike Elkin is gonna come help. I'm like, this sounds like such a fun experience. So anyways, David, welcome to the podcast. David and I were just chatting, so I feel like I have all this fun energy because we were just chatting for a second. But David, let's tell everybody where you are in the world and what you see when you look out your nearest window.
Sure. Well, thank you. And let me begin by expressing my appreciation to you, Tammy, for inviting me to be part of this wonderful podcast series. I am sitting in a corner of my living room, which ever since the pandemic has been my home office. And I look out the window at a lovely, shrubs and trees and grass of a co-housing community where I live in Acton, Massachusetts. It's a community of 24 homes that we all built together. I mean, not physically built, but we hired the contractors, and we live in a community that's sort of halfway between a commune and a condominium. It's wonderful. As I look out the window, I see not just people who are my neighbors, but people who are my friends, including their dogs and their, if they're off to the market, whatever. So I get to see a little slice of their lives. And when I walk around, they get to see a little slice of mine. And I love living in an intentional community.
How long have you lived there?
So we moved in 95, but
oh, wow. Okay.
6 years of planning to create this community. So anybody who's interested in co-housing, I invite them to write to me. I'm always happy to talk about it. And I have a very easy email address, which is dhoffman, DHOFFMAN, at BLC, which stands for Boston Law Collaborative, .law, not .com, .law. And I'm very happy to share the experience of living in community.
Oh, wow, I love that. That's amazing, and that's very generous of you to give everyone your email. I'm guessing that it feels like, so not neighbors, not friends, but I'm guessing it feels like family with all the pros and cons that family brings.
Absolutely. And, at key moments, the pulling together of community is very powerful. I'll give you an example. In 2014, my late wife, Beth, who was an IFS therapist, finally passed away after a 4-year battle with lung cancer, and she died at home, and in home hospice. My kids were and I were by her side. So it was, we all have to go at some point, and I'm glad that she was able to be here at home. Um, that happened at about 9:45 in the morning, and that evening, at supper time, up in the common house of our community, there were people from every single one of the 24 homes gathered together in a circle to mourn Beth's passing and to support, those of us in her immediate family. And of course, we also gathered for happier events, when there are babies in the community, and we have a New Year's music jam. So um, it's a wonderful way to live.
So, speaking of Beth, so you were a lawyer for, I'm guessing, a pretty long time.
Yes.
And then Beth was a therapist and she was trained in IFS and she started talking IFS in your home. This is my story that I'm
Yes.
making up. Like
Yes.
she started talking about it in your home
Oh, you got it.
and you caught on to it and you thought this might help me with all these troubled people. Like people aren't super happy when they have to go see a lawyer.
That's true. We're a mediator, and I do
Mhm.
both. I serve as a lawyer, and I sometimes serve as a mediator. So, actually, the story of learning from Beth is a little bit embarrassing because she had this training. She was an early adopter of IFS in her practice. When she did her level one training, Dick Schwartz was her level one trainer. So this was in the early years, and she was very excited about it. And but I didn't get it. I mean, I didn't see the connection with my work. I was just very happy for her that she found a modality that worked really well. Then, even more embarrassing, one of my colleagues at my firm, a wonderful lawyer and now a therapist named Diana Curine, handed me Dick's book, the textbook for a therapist. She was going to social work school, and she said, "You have to read this book. This is so relevant to what we do as lawyers and mediators." She put it down on my chair, and I began reading it. And I said, I didn't get it. Parts, managers, fiber. I didn't see the relevance. Um, and then in 2010, I got invited to be one of about 15 speakers at a symposium, and the topic was the negotiation within. It was a negotiation conference. I thought, I have no idea what I'm going to say. I didn't even know exactly why I was invited, except I've always been kind of interested in psychology. Um, then, as they say in New England, light dawned on Marblehead. Um, I finally thought, oh, IFS, internal family systems. It's all about the negotiation within. And I picked up the book and I read it and I talked to Beth and she explained it. She introduced me to Dick. I wrote an article about it because that's what you do if you're part of a symposium. And, they say you teach what you want to learn. I started teaching workshops with Dick for lawyers and mediators because it seems so relevant. Our clients, whether it's in mediation or law, are profoundly ambivalent about settling or fighting the good fight. And one of my teachers, my level one IFS teacher, co-leader, one was Rena Dubin, the other was Mike Elkin. Mike Elkin says everybody is ambivalent about everything all the time, which is one of my favorite of his Elkinisms. And that's certainly true in my law and mediation practice. So um, but starting in 2010, I, the light dawned, and this has been a wonderful process of learning and getting involved in the IFS community. It's such a supportive community of learners and practitioners. And I know we'll talk later about the training that's coming up this fall, but I feel so honored to have been asked to lead a training for lawyers and mediators under the auspices of the IFS Institute.
Well, so tell me about ambivalence and how you see that, whether you're practicing law or mediation. Like, how are you seeing people be ambivalent when they come to you
Sure.
for your services?
Well, I'll give you two stories, one from law and one from mediation. So, before I knew anything about IFS, in my very early years of my practice as a lawyer, I was working with a client who was getting a divorce. And uh, he would say to me, or after he got his first bill, I think he said to me, um, "We should try to settle this." And I thought, "Okay, that's great." And I wrote up a draft settlement agreement, and I sent it to him. And so about a week later, I talked to him again, and he had read the settlement agreement. He said, "Why are we being so reasonable?" And I said, "Well, I thought you wanted to settle this." He said, "Yeah, but I'm not feeling good about, compromising on all these issues." So I said, "Okay, I get it." And then the next week, um, he was back to, why is this so expensive and time consuming? You know, and and I was really confused. I didn't know about IFS. I didn't know about parts. I just thought maybe this person has, kind of split personality or something, what's now called dissociative identity disorder or something like that. But that wasn't the case at all. He's a high functioning person who had parts. So here's the second story, which took place after I got my IFS training. It was in a mediation. The long day of mediation, the plaintiff was a management level employee in a big company, not the highest manager, but one of the upper managers. And she had been laid off, and the company said that they had eliminated her position, but they hired a guy to do the work that she had been doing, and they just gave him a different title. So she was going to sue for sex discrimination, and she had a very strong case. She had an excellent lawyer. By the end of a long day of mediation, the company had offered her $250,000 to settle the case, which suggests that they recognized that they had some exposure. So I sat with her and her lawyer in a separate room. That's how we often do mediation, shuttle diplomacy. And I said to her, I sensed she was really struggling with the question of whether to accept big money. She was the primary earner in her family. She knew that if she proceeded with litigation, it could take years. And meanwhile, she had mortgage, bills to pay and so forth. So I said, I sense that there's a part of you that wants to go the distance, to fight the good fight for women's rights, and not just for yourself, but for other women as well. And she said, absolutely. And I said, I'm also sensing there's a part of you that's very worried about the practicalities of litigation and how are you going to pay the bills and how long is it going to take? She said, yep, that too. So I said to her, I think that we all have a mediator inside us that helps us make wise decisions, that can listen to these different parts inside and come up with a solution that feels right. And I'm wondering if you can sense that inner mediator inside you. She got really quiet and she said, yes. And she said, I know I need to settle this and move on. And with that, she stood up. So I stood up and her lawyer stood up. She gave her lawyer a hug. She gave me a hug and, and the case was settled. And it was the first time I had tried deploying the concept of self energy using the metaphor of mediator, internal mediator. And this story is a kind of a significant moment in my development as a mediator because I realized that I used to think of my job as trying to persuade people that settlement is a good idea. I no longer That's no longer my job description. I now feel that my job is to help people make self-led choices. And twisting arms is not only often ineffective, but it really defeats the self-determination and empowerment that mediation is all about. And so that story for me signifies a shift into using IFS as a framework and as a model for helping people overcome ambivalence.
I love that. It's naming an IFS, we call it polarized parts. So it's naming these polarized parts, which I'm guessing in all legal most legal venues, their parts are polarized, whether I'm guessing there's a lot of that, and so not only are you having them address the polarized parts, but you're having them really connect with their self, their inner mediator, which is so beautiful, and especially I'm guess again, another huge guess is that when you're in the middle of these legal things, you probably have very little access to that because 'cause you're
That's
so
true.
stressed and so
Right.
yeah.
However, I would say that the more years that pass, for me as a learner of ISS, I find that I'm developing a keener awareness of my protective system and my defensive parts. And so when a lawyer, an opposing counsel is being critical or judgmental or pointing the finger of blame in my direction, or if a judge, is giving me a hard time, I don't litigate anymore. I just do mediation and representing clients in negotiation. But there, I can remember vividly judges, being very tough sometimes. I now feel like I have a better understanding of those defensive parts, and I can get them to unblend a little more easily than was once the case. Um, ongoing learning process. But I want to go back to your point about polarized parts and tell you one more story. I have a bunch of stories that I'd be happy to share, but this one um, comes out of a divorce, and I was the mediator, and the husband was a heterosexual marriage. The husband was doing something really terrible, which was that he was bad mouthing his soon to be ex wife. They had young kids, relatively young kids, bad mouthing her to everybody in the community, the neighbors, the relatives, the friends. Why? Because she had pulled the plug on the marriage and she got involved with somebody else. I suspect that there were, reasons why she got involved with somebody else. Um, and his firefighter parts thought the best way of dealing with his feelings of shame, unworthiness, being, unlovable or whatever, was to make her bad and wrong. And he did it with such vigor. He was like a type A OCD, kind of person. He didn't miss a single neighbor. Everybody got the story. And the effect was, and he mentioned that his soon-to-be ex-wife had been using drugs, to make her even more bad and wrong. And so now the neighbors, and the relatives and friends didn't want their kids to play with his kids and, her and her kids, because they were concerned about drugs. And they just thought the whole situation seemed very toxic, which it was. So as I would try, so the pre IFS me, because this case did uh, come into my practice before I got a level one training in IFS. The pre IFS me was angry at this guy. First of all, he's uh, making it hard for me to settle this case by his actions. Second, um, we have a saying in family law: some people hate their spouse more than they love their kids. And or the saying from the Vietnam War era, we had to destroy the village to save it. He was doing all of those things. And so how am I going to engage with him empathically if I'm mad at him for behaving so reprehensibly? And I didn't have the vocabulary, I didn't have the understanding to realize that this was a part, these were firefighter parts of them. They were trying to put out the flame of rejection, which was, probably resonated with some rejection and from his, maybe early childhood or other kinds of, exiled trauma. Now that I look back on this case through the lens of IFS, I can see that I could have worked with him more successfully if I had been able to say to him, I get that you have these angry gladiator parts that, are so mad at your soon to be ex wife. And I know that you have these rational problem solver parts that love your kids, care about your kids, want what's best for the kids. And I can sense that it's complicated for you because you want things to be good for the kids, but you're also so mad at your wife and you don't want her to quote win. And because it feels to you, he was very religious. It feels to you like this would be a victory for, vice rather than virtue. And so he couched it in moral terms. So IFS is really helpful in dealing with very extreme behavior of the kind that you're sort of alluding to in the legal system. People get so riled up.
Yeah. I love that. Okay, so a couple of things are coming up for me. One is how this parallels us as therapists, that we have to do both this both paying attention to myself and my parts as I'm paying attention to tracking other people's
Mm.
parts. Like we're tracking our self and parts and we're tracking their self and parts. And it sounds like when you do that for you as a lawyer or mediator, it feels better for you, or it feels better for you to be more self-led and for you to be taking care of your parts, and then to be able to notice the clients or the yeah, I guess you call them clients. Clients, you're noticing that too, and so it sounds really similar. Like, it sounds like we're just sort of really doing the same thing, like paying attention to both.
Absolutely. And um, I think the more work that we lawyers and mediators do on ourselves, the more available we are, the more self energy we can bring, and more self leadership we can bring to the parties we work with.
Yeah. Um, the other thing that comes up for me is we're talking about Mike Elkin, and Mike Elkin says what couples fight about is who's bad, like who's good and who's bad. And I'm thinking the mediation is like the ultimate fight for who's good, who's gonna win. I feel that way. I don't feel this way now about my ex-husband, but I remember there's a time when I'm just sort of like, I don't want him to win. Just, no matter what. I was like, I just didn't want him to win. Um, and yeah, and having to work with my parts around that. So how do you see that? How do you see that even in yourself, or how do you see that in the lawyers or the mediators you're working with, that you're teaching IFS to? I mean, you're not teaching IFS, but you're, helping them learn IFS. Like, how are you seeing that fight for like who's bad, who's the baddest? Like,
Right.
and yeah,
Well, so I have two thoughts about that. First one is going back to Mike Elkin's comment. I remember the very first workshop that I went to at the IFS annual IFS conference was his workshop on high conflict couples. And
okay,
the early part of the workshop, he asked the following question. When people are in conflict, when couples are in conflict with each other, what do they most want? And, some people said love and some people said respect. And we were all scratching our heads. And he said innocence. They, they want to see you as a good person. They want to see themselves as a good person. And the other person is pointing the finger of blame that they were not a good parent or they were not a good provider or they were, not a good spouse and, loving partner and pointing the finger of blame. And it's mutually assured destruction because our firefighter parts, as he puts it, they fight fire with gasoline.
yes,
So, um, so yes, I see that frequently. And what I often do when I see couples going at it, if I'm in the mediator role, is I say to them, I sense that the two of you are having this conversation right now through your gladiator parts. And, gladiator parts are good parts. I mean, we need them to protect our boundaries and, keep us safe at times. In this conversation today, in this mediation, I'm wondering if you could invite those gladiator parts to just take a step back. They don't have to go away. They can watch what's going on, make sure you're okay. But ask them to just take a step back and invite your problem solving parts to the table and see if that will help us come up with some solutions. I find that metaphors like self energy as the intermediator or gladiator parts instead of talking about firefighters, angry firefighters. People get the message without having to teach the model and the typology of parts. But I wanted to say a word about this idea of winning, um, because it can be unreasonable, and as we say in IFS, part of our job is to figure out the reasonable reason for unreasonable behavior.
Mm.
So this story is about a trial where I represented an insurance company. It wasn't a big insurance company; it was a little insurance company. The president of the insurance company had fired the vice president of sales for doing a bad job, and the vice president sued the insurance company. So my client wanted me to defend the case, and I told him I had talked with plaintiff's counsel that they were willing to settle the case for $100,000, and that it was probably going to cost about 200,000 to try the case. And he said, I'm not interested in settling a case. I'd rather pay you or your firm $200,000, and because I know we'll win, rather than pay $100,000 to somebody that I fired and who didn't treat the company well. And I thought, wow, that $100,000 delta is a lot to pay for an emotional feeling about the case. But I look back now and I think he had a reasonable reason for what seemed at the time like unreasonable behavior, which was it was important to him to feel vindicated. And you don't feel vindicated in a settlement. You do feel vindicated, perhaps if the trial comes out well. Um, Also, people generally, not just this president of the insurance company, people generally will stand up for what they believe is, quote, fair and just. And that's a part of us. And it's a useful part. And it's very widespread. I think we all have it to one degree or another. And it has served us well as a species to have this part that, supports fairness and justice. And I'm happy to report that it was a jury trial and we did win the case. It would have been really bad if we spent all the money on legal fees and then we lost the case. But uh, he and I both felt that we were likely to win because justice was on our side. Uh,
You talked about I'm glad you said that about the gladiator because I actually had just written down the word gladiator because I know you talk about that in one of your articles. And I just lost my train of thought. Oh, okay. This is what I was gonna say. You talk about that with conflict, like there are parts of you that like conflict or that are they're fine with conflict as part of how you can do such a good job at your job, but that when there's a big emotions in conflict, then it's really hard. It's hard to have conversations with with people. It's hard to settle. It's hard to yeah, have those difficult conversations when there's so much heightened emotion. But I'm guessing by the time people come to you, they're driven by emotion, right? The parts that are driving the bus are very emotional. So what do you do with that? I mean, are you immediately sort of trying to talk about parts or talk in parts language to kind of get them out of that kind of emotional mind or emotional parts?
well, let me speak to that question in the context of mediation. So one of the things mediators often do is spend at least some of the time meeting with people individually. So I can ask them about what parts of you get triggered when you are with your uh, sibling, let's say. I'm mediating a case right now involving some adult siblings, and they clearly push each other's buttons. Much easier to talk about that in a separate session. But even when people are together, I'll tell you a story about a divorce mediation in which the parties were really going at it about money. They had figured out all the kids' issues. That wasn't a problem, but the money was a big issue. And the wife, again, it was a heterosexual marriage. The wife looked over to me and said, "David, I'm really concerned that you'll think I'm greedy because I'm fighting so hard for the money here." And I thought that was a very vulnerable statement to make.
Yeah.
And I thought this is an opportunity. And I said to her in the presence of her soon to be ex-husband, I think there's a part of each of us that's concerned about money. And my feeling is that we should be grateful to those parts of us that are focused on money because they help us survive. I mean, imagine how chaotic life would be if we didn't have a part that worried about the money. So, but I also know that you have a part that cares about the kids. You have a part that cares about being friends with your soon to be ex husband. We all have many parts. And so I would encourage you to just express some gratitude to the part of you that's focused on money and understand that that's not your only part. And there's no reason to feel embarrassed about having such a part because we all have it. Now, while I'm having this conversation with her, my peripheral vision is very much focused on
Yeah.
husband, and he's writing down notes as a quote. He thought, "Oh my God, here comes the rebuttal," because he's going to say, "No, David, you're wrong. She is greedy." You
Right.
know? Um, and with some trepidation, I looked over to him and I said, "I see you've been making a lot of notes." And to my relief, he said, "Yes." He said, "This is really interesting. I'm writing this down because it seems very relevant to myself also." And I thought, "Oh my God, that's like the moment you live for when you're a mediator and also in my case, teacher, because I love sharing the insights of IFS with clients because, as we all know, we want people to be able to use this at home, not just, in the law office or the therapy office or the mediation office. We're trying to help people have capacity to, manage their own parts.
Yes. Use this at home.
Yes.
Love that. I love that so much. Um, so one of the things that you do talk about is I don't you probably don't say it this way, but kind of the limits of like you're not the therapist, like you're not their marital therapist, but you have to do a little bit of therapy with when you're doing this. And so tell me how you kind of figure that out or how you're like, the goal is to, let's say, get the settlement or get the information for the settlement, but I need to do some of this therapy stuff before we get there.
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, and because the use of IFS by lawyers and mediators is so new, this is something we're figuring out, and
Yeah.
there are a bunch of us. I'm not the only one. There are a bunch of us doing this. And I think the answer that we've arrived at least for the moment, is that we don't go about healing exiles. We're not trying to, you know, um, unburden exiles, lead people to their own unburdening of those exiles. We sometimes stumble upon exiles because people tell us about them, um, which is okay. And so we have to be well versed in, oh, that's an exile. Let's figure out how to make it safe for the person who's now shared in a very vulnerable way some part that experienced a lot of trauma. But that's not our focus. It sometimes happens, but our main focus is helping people be less defensive. In other words, we're trying to befriend their protective parts and make sure that they know that we understand that they have good reason for being concerned about X and being concerned about Y. And we appreciate those concerns and it's going to help us solve the case to be aware of those concerns and what those parts are trying to accomplish. And one further thing on this point, um, IFS clinicians often talk about developing parts detectors in themselves. And so, one of the things that we lawyers and mediators, I think, can do better is being very sensitive to the antennae that our clients have so that when we ask a question, we're doing it in a way that doesn't cause them to feel judged or criticized. That they hear that the question is coming from a place of empathy. It's coming from self. It's coming from curiosity and compassion as opposed to judgment. And that's, I think that's one of the main functions that we can perform using IFS as lawyers and mediators, as opposed to trying to do the kind of long-term healing engagement that you and other therapists do.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. With like something, I know it's not simple, but something so simple as just naming people's parts or inviting the gladiator parts to step back. You're giving them a tool they can do at home, and you're also softening something in the room so you can get your goal accomplished. Like you don't have to do too much deep work just to name that and make a big impact.
Exactly. And as with the woman who is concerned about appearing greedy, I think we can let people know that there's nothing wrong with feeling triggered by the other person. That it makes total sense that you would be triggered by this person because they remind you of your parent who was very judgmental and critical or whatever. We don't have to go back and heal that broken
Right.
style.
Right, right. Right, and there's a reason there's a reason why these people are meeting with you, right? There's a reason why there's conflict in the sibling relationship or the marital relationship, and so you're seeing that played out. Yeah, David, why in the world would you wanna jump in the middle of everyone's conflict? I just don't understand that.
Great question. You know, I I used to use the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode assessment tool. I don't use it much anymore, but it's an interesting tool that helps people figure out what's their conflict style. Is it to avoid conflict, to be competitive, to be accommodating? I see you.
I raise my hand with avoid. Me,
Of
yep.
course, yes, subgroup, definitely, I'm with you on that, and what I found was that mediate and then there's compromise, there's collaborate, there are these 5 different conflict styles, and what I found over and over again with mediators is that it seemed like a majority of us were in that avoid category, and I feel like we spend our time in the fire of conflict because we're trying to work out our own issues about conflict avoidance. I think that's been true for me because I grew up in a family where there was a lot of conflict, though much of it was suppressed and not overt, but you could feel it. And it made me want to walk away from conflict. But I find that being a lawyer, the attraction for me, and also as a mediator, is to help make the world a better place. So if I want to do that, it means I have to uh, sit in that fire and work with everybody's parts.
That's beautiful. So, David, you are doing this 6-week IFS workshop. So tell me about this workshop that you're doing, which sounds amazing.
Yes. So back in, I guess it was the years between 2010 and the pandemic. I did a series of in-person workshops for lawyers and mediators with I was so lucky. I got to do it with Dick Schwartz several times, Mike Elkin, with Percy Ballard, with Kate Lindgren, just amazing teachers, amazing therapists. And I learned so much from co-training with them. And the lawyers and mediators we were working with felt it was really useful. But these were, maybe 1 or 2 day. I think one of them was a 3-day, training. Um, and we didn't yet have sort of, fully developed materials. We were kind of, developing it as we went. And one of the things that changed in, recent years was that the IFS Institute decided to stop offering level 1, level 2, level 3 trainings to people who aren't therapists for very sound reasons. It makes total sense. And then the question is, well, what do we do for coaches? And what do we do for lawyers and mediators or educators or other people who find the IFS model useful. And so what's now unfolding, last fall there was a IFS Institute training for coaches. And this fall we'll be offering this brand new training starting October 1 through November 5th, 3-hour sessions every Wednesday for 6 weeks for lawyers and mediators. And the idea is to develop the training modalities that will make IFS useful for these other professions without creating the appearance that we are uh, authorizing non-therapists to do therapy, which would be very, inappropriate. So that's sort of uh, the background to how this training got launched, and we're hoping that we'll, have a good experience offering it through the institute, and if so, hopefully it'll become a regular part of the IFS Institute's offerings.
I love it. I don't think I realized that's I was like, Sarah was like, "Here, interview David." I was like, "Great." And then we talked, and I don't for some reason, I didn't put it together that that's why this was happening. So thank you for sharing that with me. That's wonderful. I love to hear that. So people can find that at the IFS Institute's web page.
Yes.
Um, David, is there anything else you want to say before I ask my final question?
Yes. So I just want to share one pithy thought, and I can't remember who I got this from, but it was so helpful. When I first got interested in the psychology of mediation and conflict resolution, and this was before Beth had studied IFS, she handed me the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, and showed me the pages where I could find, clinical descriptions with diagnostic criteria of the people that I worked with. And I looked at it and said, yeah, this is the secret decoder ring of psychology. Now I understand why people I work with are sometimes so difficult. They have these dysfunctions. And then when I got trained in IFS and I realized that, in IFS, we don't really talk about those clinical categories so much. Mike Elkin says, there's one diagnosis. It's a, a burdened part is taking extreme role in our internal system. That's that's the entire diagnostic, description for all of the various ways they manifest. And so someone said to me once, and take it very much to heart, that the DSM and the traditional models of psychological treatment of what we call dysfunction, or what they call dysfunction. The DSM asks, what's wrong with this person? IFS asks, what happened to this person? And I just find that so touching and really resonates with the title of your podcast, The One Inside, because we're trying to find out, you know, what happened. And because when we learn their story, there's the Longfellow quote, if we could see the secret history, read the secret history of even our enemies, we would find enough material there, enough sorrow and suffering to uh, reduce our animosity and open up our hearts. And that's my quest, is to get in touch with the one inside for with all the people that I work with.
David, thank you so much. That was beautiful. If you had to do something different in your life, you
Mm.
could not be a lawyer or a mediator, what would you do?
Well, for 7 years before I went to law school, I was a woodworker. I made my living making kitchenwares, housewares, toys, games, even a little bit of custom furniture. I still have my tools, and I find that immensely rewarding. So if the bottom drops out of the law market and the mediation and arbitration market, I'll go back to making cutting boards and uh, furniture for people because it's immensely satisfying.
Love it. David, thank you so much. I'm so glad you're a part of this community. Thanks for hanging out with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you left a rating, a review, a like, comment, share with your family, your friends. That would mean so much to me. My book is available at your favorite independent bookstore or on Amazon. You can visit my website, tammysallenberger.com, or you can download a free Get to Know a Should part of you. You can follow me at IFS Tammy on Instagram and at The One Inside on Facebook and on YouTube. Jeff Schrum co-produces The One Inside, and I am forever grateful for Jeff. Also thankful for Jack Rudin for creating the music, and just thank you for listening. 6 seasons, over 1 million downloads. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you in this community. I'll see you next time.